Elon Musk, Satya, Sundar, they're all H-1B immigrant that have made it in America. So I do think that the whole entire Silicon Valley are really made of people from all over the world.
Let's start with one of the last articles that you wrote about the mistakes that founders do when they enter US market. What made you write about this right now?
Recently, Science Park actually invited about 10 startups to hang out in Silicon Valley for a few months. And they will come to a Silicon Valley investor and say, hey, I'm making money. But unfortunately, if you have customers that they never heard of, they really don't care. But trust me, if you're early stage and you get a few million users in the US, people will be shocked. Because in general, in terms of user acquisition, it's quite expensive in the US. That's why there's not that as many people doing consumer.
What we noticed actually is a surprising trend over the last couple of years. As soon as US kind of close enough for Chinese tech, surprisingly, we see a lot of companies going to Hong Kong as a first stopover in what they call going overseas strategy.
US is basically making it harder and harder for people getting visa if you're brand new to the US. I think Hong Kong could potentially take advantage of this.
It is. Let's start with one of the last articles that you wrote about the mistakes that founders do when they enter US market.
Of course.
What made you write about this right now?
There have been a lot of international founders come and visit. And by the way, I'm originally born and raised in Hong Kong. And recently, Science Park actually invited about 10 startups to hang out in Silicon Valley for a few months. And many of them with the hope that coming to Silicon Valley means that they can raise Silicon Valley dollar. And I realized I've been repeating sort of the same advice, I guess, to a lot of international founders, and hence why I wrote the article that, what international founders, 5 mistakes they usually make when they're trying to raise Silicon Valley money. By the way, it's not just apply for Hong Kong founders. I really think that it could be founders from Germany, it could be founders even from Canada, especially when they think that, I have I'm making money. Maybe a few $100,000, and they will come to a Silicon Valley investor and say, hey, I'm making money. But unfortunately, if you have customers that they never heard of, they really don't care. So there's a lot of really small little intricacy that, really like $1 here and $1 there, not all revenue are born equal.
So what you're saying essentially that a lot of people outside of the US have this sort of illusion that the moment they step into Silicon Valley, they show the investors their shiny product, show the metrics, the hockey sticks, and the deal is done.
Well, by the way, I'm not trying to encourage people don't come. In fact, I am an immigrant myself to the US, and I'm so thankful for the opportunities. And don't forget, like Elon Musk, Satya, Sundar, who's CEO of Google, they're all H-1B immigrant that have made it in America. So it's absolutely possible. But there are small things, small checklists, what I wrote in the article, from sort of revenue or who's on your cap table, or small things that we just need to be aware of. As somebody who, I do think that the whole entire Silicon Valley are really made of people from all over the world. At the same time, most of the people writing checks are still American. So therefore, they have a certain lens on expectation when you come to the US. Is at the end of the day, most VCs are lazy and it's image recognition. If you don't look a certain mold, they tend to get very confused. And when they're confused, it's not really their job to make things easy. It's our job, if we're the founders, to make them understand why we're like the shit.
But from your observation, do you see a lot of success stories of founders coming out from other places, entering Silicon Valley, talking to the VCs, and ended up in successful rounds?
Yeah, of course. I think, for example, a couple hot companies that is going on for 2025, Lovable, not a Silicon Valley companies, but a lot of US customers. And now they are I don't remember how much they raised, but they are hiring big time, like in the US.
11 Labs in the UK.
11 Labs, although we invested in another company called Play.ai, which is in Palo Alto, got acquired by Meta. But yes, 11 Labs doing quite well in the US also. So it's absolutely possible. But you have to think about, in both of these cases, you start with very self-serve tools. So you can use 11 Labs, you can use Lovable, pay by usage or pay like $5. And then it doesn't matter to the users. They may not even know that it's from the UK in this case. And so it really depends. And think about TikTok, right? Chinese tools and consumer apps that every single teenager in America uses it. Do they really care where it's from? Not really. They love the tool.
But the critical difference is that their client base, a big portion of their existing paying clients were in the US.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. So I think maybe just to zoom in on, I think this year, I would say 99% of the companies and founders we met are working on enterprise and B2B. And the way that we usually look at enterprise is by the way, raise capital, we very much focus on investing in infrastructure software. So it means most of our founders, their customers are developers. As you know, I work with a lot of geeky developers. They don't like to sell to. But beside the point, B2B, mostly it depends on, do you go after sort of the smaller ticket size, which is sort of the Lovable of the world. You start with free. And if you really want to continue to use it or publish your website that you built with them, you have to pay. And usually for small subscription fees. I usually will ask a founder, hey, what's your ideal customer profile? Are they the big enterprise, Fortune 500 companies where they will pay 6-digit, over $100,000 up to $1 million? We're a proud investor of Databricks. Databricks, I think, have a few hundred, over 1 million, customers, and now their revenue is at $4 billion. It's crazy. Are you going after that style of customer? Or is it the Lovable, the Cursor, or 11 Labs, where maybe the first checkout on your basket could be $40? And I think a lot of the international founders that we have seen lately are almost treating these sort of the freemium model or the small subscription model as a start when you enter the US. And that bar is much lower. If you are paying somebody, 6-figured, then of course, I need to see you face to face. I need customer service. I need you to come to my office. But if I'm somebody where, okay, I can just pay for this tool with a swipe of a credit card, $5, $10, $30, up to $100, no big deal. So we're seeing more and more global international founders, when they go to market in the US, they start with that. And then when they have enough mass within a corporation, let's say, oh my God, there's 100 users all paying $50, but they all come from JP Morgan, then maybe I should upsell. And this is when, really should think about setting up an office, and because they do need to see people face to face.
So realistically speaking, if you're a founder flying from elsewhere to Silicon Valley, you meet investors, you convince to have maybe a couple of them to sign you a check. Unlikely that you just come back and continue your business elsewhere. You have to physically relocate and station in the US.
I think it depends. That's always the best answer for everything. It depends. It really depends if you are into B2B and enterprise software. Yes, I do think that if you're serious about the US market and you are working on an enterprise software, America really is the best place. A lot of US corporate don't trust everything you hear on the news. They're still willing to pay. And I'm not saying that like Hong Kong or the rest of Asia, they won't pay. But in general, Fortune 500 companies in the US, there is a higher possibility where you could grow a 5-digit to a 6-digit to a 7-digit contract value.
The willingness to pay, sort of the adoption.
Yes, and they're more
right.
open-minded to try out these new tools. I feel like a lot of the Asian corporate is relatively slower
Like
to adopt. Yeah, but at the same time, don't get me wrong. We have local companies here have done really, really well. My previous fund invested in a few local companies from the 9gag to Datacook. There are definitely companies have done really well here without ever step foot in America. So at the end of the day, is really to think about what are you working on? What are you willing to go after and your focus? And I think helicopter style, to fly into the US once every 3 months is really not the way to grow.
Helicopter style, like how you phrase it. So essentially, if you're serious about raising money in the US, at first you need to have customers in the US to start with.
Yeah, ideally.
Then you need to be there.
That's correct.
Permanently.
That will be ideal.
What else?
I think it depends on what stage. So let's say you're working on I'll give you a very concrete example. There is a company, a LLM company from Japan. It's called Solana. And David Ha, I actually think he's originally from Hong Kong, and he relocated to Tokyo. Of course, the two founders spent some time at Google, and I think one of the founders also was the original author for the Transformer paper. So amazing pedigree. So they are determined to build the LLM from Japan. They came to Silicon Valley to raise their seed, and they were actually quite successful. And with full intention to say, hey, we're going to just focus on Japan. So in that case, they actually did quite well. So there's always exception to the rule, but I think the most important thing for this conversation is to help everybody to understand what are the rules. So starting with seed round. The seed round is, first off, if you haven't built anything, sometimes it's almost better that you haven't done anything than have done something, but let's say your customer list is partly in Hong Kong and then partly is in the US. And then the US investor will get kind of confused. Wait, how are you only have 5 people. There's already 2 time zones. Are you going to be Hong Kong focused or are you going to be US focused? If the answer is, there's no bad answer, but if the founder say, you know what, yeah, Hong Kong is going to be one of the focus, I would suggest rather than both at seed stage, focus on Hong Kong, grow to a few million in revenue. And then when you do the A or B, come to the US and say, we already conquer Hong Kong and come to the US.
The question is how you can grow to a few million revenue without the sort of access to the investment, as same as you would have.
I can give you another example. We invested much later on, GoodNotes, an amazing, one of the most popular iPad note-taking app. And GoodNotes originally started in Hong Kong. And Steven, who's the founder and CEO, he bootstrapped it into millions of users. So everything is possible without raising a dime.
I feel like we talk a lot about exceptions rather than sort of en masse. But I have this feeling of that everything cool and sexy happens in the Silicon Valley right now, especially in sort of industry of AI. And the people just around outside of the US sort of having this massive feeling of missing out.
That's how I feel on a daily basis. So don't worry about that. But I have to say, I do think that the energy in Silicon Valley is definitely very kind of stages. I do encourage everybody to come visit, but I am a born and raised Hong Konger. I do think that it's absolutely possible to build a unicorn here in Hong Kong, but everybody needs to understand the right strategy. I'll give you and by the way, every single venture capitalists are here to invest in the outlier, right? It's not about making sure that we do some. By the way, there's nothing wrong with building a lifestyle business and happy and never have to deal with venture investors, because the minute that you get venture investment, the clock starts ticking. There's expectation. And if you are about slow growth, 10 or 20% per year growth, that is not a venture business. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not a venture business. And the minute that you have venture investment at the earlier stage, our expectation is 100% growth year over year. Even for Databricks at this point, is still doing it at least 50% growth. It's insane. But you have to kind of think, and by the way, let's say if you decide to, build a new company today, as a friend, sometimes I may not advise you to raise venture money, because it really depends on your aspiration of what is the end goal. Just put it this way: the minute that you have venture investment, even you don't want to, the investor, even though I do think that Silicon Valley investor is a little nicer, they are usually okay with you not making money for the first 2 or 3 years. But of course they have expectation, because they have their boss too, as some sort of exit one day. And sort of slow growth, or sort of, if I use a Chinese analogy, sort of slow cook the soup, that is not the way to go. They expect sort of boom, boom, high growth. So it really depends on what you're trying to build.
I have a feeling over the last couple of years here we're in Asia, it feels like we're a little bit stolen in terms of VC funding, especially in the contrast with what's happening in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
You see projects out of YC that, okay, it sounds interesting, but not groundbreaking, raising 20, 30 million post-raise, whatever. And you see quite solid companies out of Asia struggling to get a new round. What is? Do you agree with this and with this observation? And why do you think it's happening?
I think sure. I think U.S. has been sucking up a lot of the capital around the world, and have a lot of a few things. One is U.S. IPO market is coming back this year, from the Figma to Reddit to Klarna. Is good IPO. So finally, and even honestly, even for U.S. venture capital, been hurting quite a bit without any sort of exit. And Meta, I think, sucked. Mark Zuckerberg have a little FOMO also. So he's been buying at least $20 to $30 billion in acquisition this year. So there's a void that is brewing. It's sort of, you put a frog into warm water, now it burst out. So that's been brewing for a few years. And in retrospect, I think there's a lot of amazing founders in Asia, but you just don't see as much as a really big, giant exit, other than maybe the Grab or the C Group in the world. This year, having said that, I've been quite excited for Hong Kong, because I've been seeing quite a few IPO, of course, from mainland listed in Hong Kong, but still, it's a great story to tell. I've been super impressed by Lovable, Pop Mart, or the Chaji or Meixue. These are things that is not technology.
Luckin Coffee.
Luckin Coffee, which listed in the U.S. And I just went to New York 2 weeks ago. You see Luckin Coffee everywhere in New York City. So these are things, it's not necessarily high growth tech, but guess what? I think every single cities deserve a personality and sort of a positioning. I don't think we, Hong Kong, need to copy Silicon Valley. Like Hong Kong, you've been living here for 15 years. You're here for a reason. I think every single city deserves its own branding and positioning, and we don't need to be Silicon Valley. We can just be Hong Kong and be very successful on our own, but we need to find our footing.
You mentioned Chinese successful enterprises, but in the current sort of geopolitical context, we see a lot of VC capital leaves China. And there's already with a certain perception of international founders coming to Silicon Valley. I think Chinese are singled out even under sort of more, let's say, scrutiny.
Yes.
What's your observation, and what would you advise to these Chinese founders looking for opportunity in the US?
I wanted to point out that when you come to Silicon Valley, or maybe just quickly Google the 14 people that Mark Zuckerberg hired recently, stole from OpenAI. Out of the 14, first off, 100% of these 14's $100 million salary package folks are all immigrants. And at least, I think 8 or 9 of them are originally from China. So Silicon Valley is absolutely no discrimination against Chinese. But if you never work in the US, so let's say we have friends from Hong Kong now, brand new, dropped in Silicon Valley, don't know anybody, never worked in the US. That's sometimes take a little bit of adjustment. You're brand new into town, you don't know who is who. Of course, you do need to take some time to learn the rope. And I remember a long time ago, before investing, my last startup was a Dolphin browser. Dolphin browser was actually a Chinese grown browser with 100% like US in terms of monetization. So we went to a lot of places to explore international market. I went to Moscow for the first time because of Dolphin, and Vietnam and India. And I realized just to start with, it's not even, okay, now I'm ready, my product is ready. The product wasn't ready at all. In fact, I think step number one, if anyone wants to sort of check out the US market, the founder, CEO, and the head of product, and hopefully the CEO is the head of product, but the product person, the CEO, need to physically come. First thing is not to pitch for investment, is to actually talk to customers, to really understand whatever you're building. And in my case, at the time was a Android mobile browser, is to learn and observe and ask questions and interview as many people as possible. Could be literally as easy as, please show me your phone. How do you use whatever you're using for your browser? And making sure that your product is actually ready. And a lot of time when you first launch, to be even more practical, because I remember me going to international market. I obviously, if you are just starting out, you don't have all these resources to set up offices everywhere. With consumers, a little bit easier because you can actually launch on an app store and only translate the app store description without the product necessarily ready yet. But just based on this, like search on the app store, and if you see certain download, you can sort of see, oh, maybe I should explore, I don't know, the Indian market because there are more folks that downloading. And so there are tricks where when you see more traction, even if you can launch from Hong Kong, but when you actually start seeing traffic or user coming from a specific place, and let's say US is the place because US are in general more open on paying for enterprise tools, and then really talk to your US user to get a better sense, hey, why are you paying? What do you like, what you don't like? I think most of the US users, the good thing is they don't actually care that you speak with an accent because so is everybody else. But it's really sort of your way of practice in terms of speaking to the customer. Do you respond really fast? Do you ask question in a way that don't be weird about it and just sort of like be a very, very good customer support and service and make them successful? That is really the Silicon Valley spirit. I think everybody can have that, even you're in Hong Kong.
Would you bet on fresh immigrant coming from, say, Hong Kong, Asia to the US, looking for investment versus the company that already established?
I have rare. First off, I would say, I don't have the exact number, but I would say more than half of raise capital founders are immigrant originally and move from somewhere else. So it's very, very common. But I think the key thing is by the way, think about TikTok, right? They were able to be they are very successful in the US. When you get to so successful, that's a different story. But it's absolutely possible. But when you're having conversation with the investor, you need to show that you really understand what the user want. And I found that a lot of people who first came to Silicon Valley, when you ask them more questions, they don't really know. So you need to basically educate the investor something that they don't already know.
In the last decade, you spent a lot of time between China and Silicon Valley. What's happening with the VC scene in mainland China at the moment?
It's been very, very hard for a lot of my friends and colleagues in China. IPO is one thing. US and China relations been deteriorating quite a bit and still not so good. But the main thing is the exit environment for Chinese startups, and combination of the economy and plus COVID, it's just been very, very hard for them. And I've been having some conversation with VCs from China lately, and they've been exploring quite a bit of Southeast Asia as a market. And there is a small group of Chinese founders that are coming to the US and have done well. But when they do come, they also been advised where, they should sort of like lay low to start with. But more importantly, is basically making sure that you do as much customer interview first. And when you do raise, make sure that your cap table is very clean, because you don't want to get into any conversation with CVS. It's just not fun. So
what about the China AI dragons, tigers, all this new breed of AI companies? DeepSeek kind of brought a certain hope in the future of AI industry within China. What's your observation?
I think in January, the DeepSeek moment was definitely a wake-up call for Silicon Valley. And the fact that they were able to, well, at least the team claimed that used $6 million to train the model and ready to go was shocking. In retrospect, in comparison, OpenAI announced in January the Stargate project, and now I think they budget for $500 billion. So it's night and day. And so it really changed the mood, I think, for the Chinese tech industry. And compared to the last few years, which everybody has been a little bit depressed, I really think DeepSeek have changed the narrative for China AI industry. There's a few areas I actually think China is ahead compared to the US. Robotics. My God, like if you look at the Unitree, and every other week they have some product videos, and the last one I saw was the robots was doing like kung fu and like robotic Jet Li. Wow, I don't see that in the US. EV, and last time I went to Shanghai was in May 2025, just a few months ago, and from BYD to even Huawei has a car, and of course the Xiaomi EV is just beautiful. China is definitely ahead. And then last but not least is certainly energy and clean tech. And I think US is just talking about reviving 3 Mile Island, which have a nuclear disaster many years ago. And thanks to AI, it's really the world starving for energy. And US in general, any sort of the physical infrastructure built is just not as fast. So I'm quite bullish in that sense.
It's interesting.
China.
I was coming back from Sichuan, flight landed in Shenzhen. And when you enter from the departure hall within Shenzhen, you're surrounded by massive, huge like advertising, and among the characters, Chinese characters, you see clearly there's one word appears everywhere, is AI.
Yeah.
So, and it's a bunch of different companies promoting themselves, and then they focusing, okay, we actually delivering the value. These are our corporate clients. We're building AI, and it was pretty shocking to see. I never seen anything like this anywhere else. It feels like Shenzhen, at least, is fully immersed into this new sort of AI future, but yet we haven't seen yet any big success stories like global. There are a few companies like, doing good, like Minimax and so on, relatively, but yet there is no yet 11 Labs or Lovable of out of China.
Not yet, but I think a lot of Chinese founders are very smart. Now it's not about being so gung-ho, oh, I'm famous and I have to do X, Y, and Z. It's really about heads down building. I actually was playing with the ByteDance seed dance model. It's quite amazing. And I made a cartoon using actually mostly Chinese tools. CapCut is ByteDance, seed dance is ByteDance. The Alibaba Quinn model actually been performing quite well. And then also Magnus, which I should tell you this. Yesterday, to prepare for the interview, I was just sort of playing with different LLMs. And I was asking, please list all IPOs in Hong Kong for this year. I asked ChatGPT, Claude, Manus, DeepSeek, Gemini, whatever you can imagine. So can you guess which one gave me the best result? It's Manus. I noticed that some of the data I thought, which by the way, the entire list is on this Hong Kong Stock Exchange website. So it's not any encrypted data or private data. But I do see the US LLM maybe not even using some of the data, which even is open for learning, versus I think the Chinese model are obviously closer to Hong Kong, so there those data available. It's just fascinating to me that I think China this year really have leaps and bounds in terms of performance. And then let alone a lot of the Chinese LLM are much cheaper to use, to build, and they're, I think, probably in the 2 cents per token for 10,000 token, compared to OpenAI is a lot more expensive. So I think the jury is still out. It's not a done deal yet. Almost every month, or maybe Chinese 996 speed is even faster. Every week there's a new version, and every single new version you can feel things are improving every week. So I think give it another year, you'll be surprised. A lot of people who are playing with different things. And by the way, the persona is also different. I was hanging out with some folks from LA, from Hollywood. They don't really, like most of the users are not political at all. They just want to use good tools. And if things is really expensive, I'm going to pick the best and the cheapest. And some of the Chinese models I play with recently are outperforming than the US ones.
And we're in Hong Kong right now. Where do you see Hong Kong's role in all of this going forward? I mean, IPO, obviously, capital markets. But do you see success stories among the startups, AI startups?
Not yet. I think that, by the way, as I mentioned, it's not just a Hong Kong story. Most of the, other than China and US, and I mentioned one LLM in Japan, and maybe Mistral in France, you don't actually see that many countries in the world build an LLM. So pretty much, it's a little bit a Android versus iOS thing going on. Okay, if you say OpenAI is the iOS, who's the Android? Who knows? But to build an LLM, I don't think is a place for Hong Kong because it's just so expensive. But now, what we've been seeing this year is absolutely the year for agentic AI. So AI agent for specific industry, for finance, for healthcare, for legal, or AI agent for specific role. So this is for marketer, or this is for a sales person. So I can start to see where if you have industry specific knowledge, you could win, like without building an LLM. So Hong Kong naturally is a financial hub. That's why you're organizing FinTech Week, and then also healthcare and biotech. And there are actually quite a lot of interesting research that's happening in Hong Kong, where it's really using AI to make it faster in terms of research. There's no politics towards things like this, and the world is flat in that sense. I do think that Hong Kong could potentially play a role, especially in these two vertical industry, and use AI to make it even faster and lead it.
What we noticed actually is surprising trend over the last couple of years. As soon as US kind of close enough for Chinese tech, surprisingly we see a lot of companies going to Hong Kong as the first stopover in sort of what they call Chuhai, right? The going overseas strategy. And it's also coincided with the trend in China that a lot of businesses looking to go outside of China to look for new markets.
Yep.
And often we see them actually stopping over in Hong Kong as their first overseas destination.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think Hong Kong, who knows like what's the immigration or H-1B policy happening in America, but for now it does kind of seems like US is basically saying, making it harder and harder for people getting visa if you're brand new to the US. And I think this is the time when the US seems not so friendly. I think Hong Kong could potentially to take advantage of this, which I know for a fact that there are quite a few American I have talked to recently got the this like sort of a talent visa for Hong Kong without getting a job offer, and they can come here and explore. It's definitely a great move on Hong Kong part to get a lot of these talent to come and explore. Hong Kong is such a fun place. Why wouldn't they want to come?
In this regards, for us, we just opened the Shenzhen office, and partially because we want to tap into the talent pool that is out of Shenzhen. And it was rather more difficult to do it before because, especially tech people were in high demand.
Yeah.
But now you have access to much broader talent that you can't find necessarily in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So I kind of see there's interesting dynamics with businesses looking for opportunities outside of China, looking through Hong Kong, going through Hong Kong. It's kind of like a step towards the going overseas.
Yes.
But also a lot of businesses looking to tap into Chinese resources in order to produce also something for a global market.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said earlier, since you are the connector for both worlds, I really see people want. I often tell people, if you want to understand what's the future of fintech look like, go to China. WeChat Pay, Alipay. It's almost they look at me strange if I have to use cash, which is still number one thing in the US. So there are definitely more and more folks that is forget about the politics. If they want to learn about fintech, climate tech, robotics, manufacturing, EV, this 5 industry, there's a lot of things. You being the connector can absolutely play a role and help the world to sort of learn. And Hong Kong still, the whole system just pretty easy to navigate, still a bit easier than mainland China. So coming here is almost, there's no adjustment needed. It's like coming to New York. So in that sense, of course, the other way around, I've been talking to quite a few Chinese mainland founders. They also want to go to the world, right? And so setting up shop in Hong Kong, make it sort of the starting place to start thinking about where do I need to go. And yeah, we should definitely take advantage of this time.
Is it fair to say that US is currently, I won't say oversupply, but as sort of abundance of investment, VC investment especially in things like AI.
A bit.
And still, there's an appetite from the corporates to pay. Yet the adoption, the scale of adoption and the speed of adoption, incomparable with what you see in China when it comes to adoption of technology. So we kind of see this disbalance, a lack of funding on one side, but massive demand and adoption, where oversaturated capital in the US, but much slower, much less scale of adoption of the newest tech. Do you find it fair observation?
I actually took, it's not US or China per se. I actually think that for enterprise software, US in general is more open to adopt enterprise software. But for consumer software in the US compared to China, I actually think is faster in China for consumer apps or robotics or other things. Just sort of because it's like 1.4 billion people in China. Like if you don't get at least a few million to start and you do a consumer startup in China, you're basically not doing anything. But trust me, if you're early stage and you get a few million user in the US, people will be shocked because in general in terms of user acquisition, it's quite expensive in the US. So therefore that's why there's not that as many people doing consumer in the US. And maybe to change a little bit of a long time ago, because I worked on Dolphin, which is a consumer app. If I meet a founder, which is building a consumer app, here's the list of questions I usually will ask them. Okay, when did you start? What's your install base? And then what's your active users, monthly active, weekly active, daily active? What's your churn? What's your ARPU? Okay, you don't need to make money, but what do you think the ARPU should be? And then when are you going to turn on monetization? And how are you going to make money? And a lot of times, the bar that I hold for Chinese or American founders is the same. Because if you are building consumer app, you pretty much, in some sense, I expect you to go to the world. Doesn't matter China or US. But it's a very different bar that I would put on for an enterprise, B2B users, founders. Because B2B, at the end of the day, if you want to make a big companies, you do have to know how to sell top down.
Apart from like large tech companies like Tencent, Alibaba, who did a great job and scaling globally, a lot of founders in China or in Asia trying to like to go overseas. In this regards, what would you think they can learn from their American fellow founders in the way how they perceive?
I cannot speak for all founders around the world. A handful of Hong Kong founders when I meet here locally. And a lot of the founders are in love with their product. So when I meet a founders from Hong Kong, a lot of time they'll be like, they don't even ask me my name. And they don't even tell me what their names are. They'll be like, let me show you my product. And this is not what it is about. I think the number one things when first meeting, and I have a completely different article for that. I think when you first meet an investor or even like anybody, is to not to show the product. Don't get me wrong. Like I would love to see the product later, but number one is, can this person tell me in a very, very short time, what do your company do? Not what your product do. Because it's important for me to understand what sort of business you're building, not just the product that you're building. Because it's not mutually exclusive, but it's important for me to understand what's the pain point, who are you selling to, and then maybe a few minutes in or maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, at the end of the meeting, if an investor are interested, we will ask for a demo. But it's very important to think about when you're early stage. If you have customer, you're probably within the first 1 minute, you should be like, yeah, I'm building something. I'm building a healthcare app, and I'm already working with hospital A, B, and C. is this something that you invest in? And if usually customer mean dollar sign means, oh, you already have revenue. Then most, I'm not saying all, but most of the investor will be like, tell me more. So you have to kind of think about how do you logically position everything about your business and what to say first. And I see that the Americans, most of the particular Silicon Valley founders are really good at name dropping. They're really good at telling you a lot in literally most of the YC or 500 pitches. They come 90 seconds, they're done. So it's always about traction. Pain point, what do we do? We're raising this much, done. And then the investor chasing out of the room. And so make sure that you are very, very clear, and with only one goal is to score the second meeting. It is very much like dating. You don't tell the person you want to marry them the first time you meet them. You're just dating. You're just telling them just a little bit enough so that the investor wanted to chase you.
So don't talk about the product or even tech. Talk about the business. That's
right. And let's say, hey, did you know that there are, the American founders sometimes say, oh, we're trying to save the unbanked. But really in Asia, in Southeast Asia, probably more so, there's, hey, 300 million people are unbanked. They really need a new wallet. Interesting. Tell me more. Rather than, hey, let me show you my wallet. This is how it works. I'm like, okay, who's going to use it? But it's the same product. It's the same business. It's just a logical way of how you talk about what you're building.
The packaging and delivering the value that...
Yeah, very much so. And I think the US is number one in the world in terms of PR and packaging. But all these skills can be learned.
How do you learn these skills?
I'm very lazy, so I learn by watching other people. I think most of the, probably not YC, but most of the 500 demo day video are on YouTube. Just watch. Really, if you are a founder, please spend some time watching how other founders talk about themselves, because the way that you communicate to investor or on, like in this demo day, is a huge indicator to investor how you're going to talk to your customer, your partner, and your employee. And it's very, very important to learn how to talk.
Some people feel like they would be overselling this thing that they're building by sort of stretching it, but you feel like it's not a big deal.
In fact,
as long as
it's a big deal that you need to oversell. I often joke to most of the founders, like every single founders in Silicon Valley, they wear a T-shirt with their company logo on it. And you as a CEO and founder, you have to be a walking billboard. In fact, you don't have a choice. The minute that you feel like I'm overselling, you're still not overselling enough. Every single waking moment you wake up should be thinking about, what do I need to do to make sure that everybody know your product or your company exists? This is a CEO job. And by the way, I'm Chinese. I'm born and raised in Hong Kong, and sometimes I'll be like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I can do this. But no, like we cannot sell ourselves short. We really need to be out there and like be the biggest champion for your own business and your product.
Do you feel it's more like a Confucian culture, being sort of humble in a way that stops people from putting themselves out?
Maybe it's possible, and upbringing certainly play a role. But I do think that most of the founders who end up making it, I can see the transition from introvert into. Introvert is always an introvert, but they do train themselves to talk because they're so in love with their product and want people to use it. So therefore, they force themselves to start talking. I do have one very practical thing that really helped me early in my career. I started my career in Silicon Valley, and I remember very early on, some of my old bosses would be like, "Please speak up." They couldn't hear me. And so I started going to Toastmasters. it's a club that
Toast.
like Toastmaster is a speech club. It's worldwide, and it's very cheap, like maybe $100 a year. It's very cheap to join. There's different chapters around the world, and you show up at these meetings, and it's kind of like AA. You just go there, but instead of talking about your problem, people take turn to make speeches. You can talk about anything. So throughout that 3 years, I gave 30 speeches on different topic, and it really helped me in terms of improving my language skills, like my speech. And if you are in love with what you're building and you want people to use it, being able to express. And by the way, this skills is so important in the age of AI. Pretty much everything else that we can do online. And the audience who are watching this right now, maybe we're a fake AI character, and
We're not.
and maybe we're fake and using HeyGen or whatever, or VO and Nano Banana. But your way of how you make people feel and the way that you talk, no AI can replace that. And that's why it was so important for us to really hone in that skills.
So what happens when you get to this meeting with VC? How not to screw up that one?
First off, here's the attitude I would love all founders to have before you walk into the room, is most of the founders, most, not all, but most, really know more about that industry and that topic or that product much more than the VC does, right? Because most of the investor, they yes, they do see many things, but they're not deep in one thing. Hence, obviously, we love to hire engineers because we invest in a lot of developers' tools. But still, if you are a founder, like you've been thinking about FinTech Week and thinking about Startup Hong Kong Week, you know about what's going on with Hong Kong much more than anybody else does. And so when, let's say you come into the room, it's really about learning from you. Hey, this is what's going on with the market. This is some of the pain for the local startups. And I really want to build, Finoverse, this product to help address this pain point and really sort of show your understanding and how it tied to the size of the market. And a good investor really is there to listen and to learn and absorb your knowledge and trying to do pattern recognition and see, oh yeah, I've seen this before and this is going to be big. So I think number one is before you even walk in the room, you have to convince yourself you're the winner in this case. And you walk in, of course, there are also obviously questions that you should ask the VCs. But the key thing is going in is we'll do a little bit of small talk and say, hey, to start, the VC love the fact that you do your homework. So maybe when you start the conversation is, congratulations, I just saw you closed a round for X company.
So do the research on investor.
Yeah, so you walk into the room and first thing, congratulations. The small talk should be some reference to what this particular investor have done in terms of investment or exit lately. So you start the conversation very casually. And then depends on how many people in the room to do an intro. And if I'm the founder, I will want to make sure that the investor introduce themselves first. So then you get a better sense. Hopefully you have done your homework, but still it'll be good to understand sort of that dynamic in the room, who's the decision maker, who and whatnot. And then when you introduce, face-to-face meeting is good to have. Let's say if it's two of you, both of the co-founders are there. And of course, the ideal case is both of you been working together for a long time. So you can sort of show the chemistry. And then once after you're done talking, you'll be surprised a lot of time, even though you could have your deck ready to go, you already face-to-face. The best meeting is actually not to present the deck. The best meeting is really a conversation. And usually most of the investor would not invite you to meet face-to-face if they haven't already meet you on Zoom or on a call before. So very likely they already know sort of the basics. So there's no need to repeat per se, unless the VC tell you to. But the best meeting really is casual conversation. And if the investor have done their homework, a lot of time they may start asking you questions. Hey, you just mentioned you were working on this customer. What happened? And always is the best is, oh yeah, we just closed a deal with X customer and they really, really love our new feature and our launch. It's progress. And then if needed, you could go over the deck because they need more information. It's good to have that visual to set context, tell story. And do not expect any investor on the spot and say, I'm going to give you a term sheet. That's unless you're Sam Altman.
Unless it's 2021 in the crypto world.
No. But yeah, like the key is to charm and to sell. But to sell in a point where you really show that you know what you're talking about and with confidence. And the VC can smile from a mile away that you're not confident about what you're building. So you really need to sort of get yourself ready.
What other common mistakes that you see a lot of founders do when they talk to investors? Okay, we talked about not doing enough homework, learning about investors, try to sell technology rather than business, not sound very confident at the meeting. What else?
A few things on the research part. Most VCs, not all, but most, are quite transparent about, let's say for us, for example, a lot of time I would rather you not waste your time. So for us, our fund 2 is 181 million. So we invest anywhere from 3 to 5 million, sort of a late seed. That's sort of our ideal. And just like I would ask you, who's your ideal customer profile? On the reverse, our customers are founders, and our ideal founders are usually engineers, because the way that we invest, very much developers' tools, they usually come from the Google, Amazon, GitHub, Microsoft of the world. And so we know, and a lot of these put that on a website. So if you are a clean healthcare seed stage or Series B raising $30 million, I don't want you to waste my time on me because it's really a mismatch. For most investors, when they set up their fund, they have a fund thesis because they have their boss too. I have limited partner who is my boss, right? It will be rare for me to all of a sudden invest in a healthcare founder because it's so often, not let alone I'm not qualified. So I think, being a first-time founders, I know you're just excited to talk to any investor, but that is a waste of your time. So the way that I usually coach my friends who are founders is develop a short list of investor that is your ideal investors. And the easy way to find this is, first off, you also need to identify who are the investors you should not pitch because they already invested in your competitors. So it's easy to figure out that list, who not to invest. But you could also see, okay, healthcare investor, these are the short list of people. Don't waste your time. And you can narrow, very, very clear. Ask your friends. And the best way to get an intro to an investor is from the founder they have invested in. And that is the easiest way. I would never say no to my CEOs. Always say yes, always wanted to help them. So it's just so much easier than you kind of randomly sending email and be very, very targeted. And also this, a lot of the early stage founders, first time fundraising, I know is nerve-wracking, but treat it like enterprise sales. What's that mean is other than doing research, very clear who you're going to identify, but don't do rolling close. Don't like raise $100,000 there, $200,000 like 2 weeks later, and then like 3 months later, it's just dilly-dally. That's not the way to go. The way to go is because you want to stay focused in building. Your big event is coming up soon, right? You don't want to get distraction. You want to basically any investor come to you, or when you identify investor and say, hey, I'm raising very soon, and I'm going to basically take investor meetings in the week 2 of November 15th, and can we schedule a time to talk then? So you basically group all the investor conversation in 1 week, treat it like a sales process, and ideally we have a lead. But if we don't have a lead, we're going to raise $1 million and we will take check that week. So immediately it put the investor in a place where, oh, he's running a process, rather than just sort of seem kind of random. So that's I think the best, easiest way to manage this process.
When it comes to the question of how much one should raise, what would advice you give?
I tell all founders, first off, if you don't need to raise, don't. But if you want high growth, you obviously need some money. Every single round, hopefully, you give as little equity away as possible. And here's I would like to see, although sometimes I know it's very, very hard because there's not enough investor in your region or your city. I would like to see, by the time you get to Series A, hopefully you don't give away more than 20% of your equity ownership. So I don't know what you're working on, and I don't know how long it takes for you to get to A. The A expectation is at least some revenue, 7-digit, at least $1 million if you want to raise an A. So therefore, what does it need what does it take in terms of dollar-wise or people-wise or whatever resources you need to get to your first $1 million in revenue? That is how much you need to raise, and hopefully whatever that is, you don't give away more than 20%. And the reason why I say this is because when a institution, let's say when we come in, for raise capital coming in, we sometimes, not all the time, we see on the cap table, the founder don't even own more than 50%. Some investor we never heard of own 30%, but they don't even actively working on the business.
For this season often.
It's not because we don't love you or the product.
Equity left to
Exactly.
raise for the next round.
Let's say we take another 20%. Then there's nothing left for the founder. And if the founder is not there, they're not motivated to work on the business. It's a very, very bad for us, for us jointly. So we trying to basically encourage all early stage founder to be very stingy on equity. And I know if it's your first time, you basically want to get any investor you want, but not all investors are created equally. And just be very, very protective of your equity.
What are the areas that personally you're the most excited right now in terms of investment? What are you focusing all your attention at these days?
For any venture investors, there's no one thing because we all have ADD. I've been studying, although this is not something we are all in yet, but I've been around AI infrastructure. There's a couple of areas where I found very fascinating. On the flight over here, I was ODing on watching this couple companies that doing quantum computing. I found it fascinating. It's very, very expensive to build. And I think Google announced that they launched something called Willow a few months. This all happened this year. And then Amazon working with Caltech on their version of quantum computing, and so has Microsoft. These are rocket science, and it's fascinating. But if you can imagine, wow, this year, NVIDIA decided to invest in OpenAI for $100 billion, trying to build out all these things. What if there's a much faster way to build out LLM, much faster way of learning, and maybe with a combination of quantum can make it much faster, therefore cheaper and more efficient. And then another area which has been fascinating, although, is energy use around basically every single data center, so much energy, electricity, and so much water. And in the US, they're now going to restart 3 Miles Island, which have a nuclear blow up many years ago. So people are desperate for energy, and this is really infrastructure. But there's only so many people in the world qualified on building this, and there are actually now young people building this, and I found it very fascinating.
I feel like there is a kind of two schools of VCs at the moment. The ones that believe the biggest growth we will see is a killer applications, the next Google of AI. And there's another school looking into, hold on, there is no growth for any application unless we solve the biggest bottleneck, which is data centers. All these problems that you mentioned. We can't scale unless we find a solution for the infrastructure. So I assume you sort of belong to this latter school that is focusing on fundamental issues before we going into practical applications.
I think both need to happen. If there's not enough people using any of these, like none of the infrastructure matter. I think the reason why NVIDIA decide to invest in OpenAI is because they were really, it's only 2.5 years since the ChatGPT launch. I think it was November 2022. And less than 6 weeks, they were able to achieve 100 million users. We've never seen that before. And so there's a really obvious, people are craving and wanted to use this. And therefore, why a lot of these infrastructure, I can't believe that Oracle can make a comeback because they are offering AI infrastructure and now is relevant all over again. So both things are happening in parallel.
I'm actually thinking of these old school companies like Shell, like BP, it seems like their gossips over their deaths were exaggerated.
Yeah, and then also you are also starting to see NVIDIA now is, by the way, worth $4 trillion, and it's just insane to see. But they are also changing their business model. They're not only a chipset company; they are actually. I saw the other day they're renting their own chip back from Lambda, so then they are building CUDA. They're building their own cloud, and become a cloud and build out like their server side of the business, and could be directly competing with AWS. That's fascinating. So, a lot of movement going on.
When I was preparing for this conversation, I was fascinated to read the story. How did you find this opportunity to invest in Solana in such an early time when Yakovenko was just writing his technical thesis? What's your observation of the Web3 and crypto industry at the moment? It feels like the attention is hugely moved towards the AI.
Yeah.
And not just from the capital point of view, but it's also from developers, all the builders, everyone jumping on AI train. At the same time, the crypto ecosystem kind of matured to a certain point. But do you see it emerging next Solana happening in this space? What's going on with Web3 at the moment?
If you listen to Anatoly, I've never met somebody who is really so hardworking, and I mean he's still coding every day. And if you look at his on X, pretty much I'm like, why do you have so much time to basically answer a lot of the technical questions, and working very, very closely with the jump team on Fire Dancer and Perp and all that. And a few things, I think back to the crypto industry, there's definitely some maturity, and this year I think, other than obviously the US administration seems like a lot more friendlier, I would say the big event this year is one, Circle went IPO. So stablecoin now really is a thing. And other than the Genius Act that just approved a couple months ago, there will be another one coming soon. It's called the Clarity Act. And that is going to pave the way for being able to legally operate in the US for crypto companies, which is a great thing. If you look at like Solana in terms of its usage, I'm very, very lucky that I get a chance to meet Anatoly. I think it was end of 2017. At the time, I was been coming back to Hong Kong and China, and it was sort of the heyday of crypto in China before the crazy ban. And I met Anatoly after I met all these crazy Chinese trying to do all kind of altcoins. And he basically trying to explain to me that, hey, you know, the way of proof of work like Ethereum is doing, it really would never be a faster horse. You really need to build from the ground up with proof of stake. And I really cannot build build any of these that he have done. But I just feel when you meet a person, this is before he have written a line of code. When you meet a person, you know this person is not there to make money. He really genuinely excited and built, and as he called it, like the NASDAQ of blockchain, which he certainly did it. But I was really like from 2018, which I invested in March, until 2021, really there's nothing happened. They were building and nobody really cares. But there was at one point, there's a DeFi summer. A lot of DeFi applications start building on Solana because they're really, really fast. And now fast forward 4 years later, there's a lot of things going on in the stablecoin world.
Just to clarify this, we just talked about the founders who are trying to sell technology without getting any revenues. And that's exactly the case with Anatoly, from what I'm hearing from you.
At the beginning, no revenue, nothing. Hey, by the way, open source is a little bit different. If you're open source, the way that investors see it is a little bit more traction with developers, and everything Solana built is open source. But you can see the excitement from the developers in terms of how excited they are wanting to build on top of it. Sometimes it could be DeFi, sometimes it could be NFT or meme coin. But I think the theme of this year is at least $2 or $3 trillion been transacted using stablecoin. And it doesn't matter you're using Solana or Ethereum or whatever, is definitely faster, cheaper, more efficient. It makes sense. And now even with the US giving its blessing, I'm seeing it's not just a Solana or not, the Visa, PayPal of the world are jumping onto the bandwagon and now like building on crypto. So very, very exciting time.
Amazing. Before we wrap up, I just want to ask one question. If you have one piece of advice to those founders building their stuff right now, whether it's AI or crypto or anything else, in current circumstances, current situation in the market, what would be this advice?
Please don't do anything that is like buzzword. Means AI or crypto could be hot today, but it may not be hot next in 12 months. And build for the long term. And who cares what the VC or investors say? Build something you really, really believe in, that you don't mind working on it for 10, 15 years. And really focus on the pain point that you're trying to solve. Don't change how you want to work or how you build a business because an investor say so. The investor is just here along for the ride, and we should be honored to invest in what you're building, not the other way around.
Thank you, Edith.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.